Hi, this is Johnathan Mostowski. I'm a former contracting officer, spent about 13 years at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. During that time, I discovered some new at the time, models around acquiring agile development services and modern technology. That led to me co-authoring the TechFAR handbook and then being recruited over to the U.S. Digital Service in the early days. I spent about 4.5 years there, three of which focused on the Defense Digital Service before leaving to help start a tech startup focused on selling software to the Department of Defense. And now I lead a consulting company called Agile Acquisitions, helping the federal government and companies sort of come together around agile adoption and implementation in the contracting and procurement world.
Thank you, Jonathan. My name is Darren Hoevel, president of Pliant Solutions, also on the ground with our clients, trying to leverage agile practices, organizational design, change management to ultimately bring operational excellence and good product delivery practices. I've been lucky enough to partner with Jonathan and on a current client in bringing acquisition best practices, as well as how to implement them at the brass tacks level. So the contractors, the product owners are all in line, engaged, and willing as much as possible.
And hi, my name is Bryan Miles. I'm Principal of Leadership Development and Coaching at Pliant Solutions, and I'll be facilitating our conversation between Jonathan and Darren today. So thanks so much for making the time. Just wanted to start off this conversation with a little bit about Agile Acquisitions. Can you give us just a summary of, the bottom line of what are Agile Acquisitions and why are we moving to them?
Sure. Agile acquisitions, just like agile development, is about continuous learning and iterating to prioritize the highest needs. So we just apply those same principles to the acquisition process. As I'm sure you know, the government procurement process is a complex labyrinth of rules, regulations, and policies, but it's also sort of shrouded in a lot of myths and sort of doing things as they've always been done. So what we do in Agile Acquisitions is take best practices that we've learned from various agencies, various implementations and requirements, and try to simplify and make more efficient the process to get both to the acquisition and then the execution. At its basis, there is no such thing as a truly agile contract. A contract is supposed to enable the delivery of agile development services. So the idea is to separate the contractual requirements from the technical requirements and allow the product owner, who should be empowered to direct the delivery, the flexibility they need so they're not constantly running back to the contracting shop to make changes every time prioritizations change.
And I think the other part of Agile Acquisitions is bringing agility to the contracting process, which is really bringing everyone together, not handing things over the fence, bringing your core, your CO, your business stakeholder, your product owner. Hopefully the product owner has already been identified, and have them part of the contract creation process, sharp vision, sharp objectives and outcomes, and baking that into the contract writing process. It's not an OIT problem. It's not a business problem. It's all of our problem to make sure the contract is aligned to what the outcomes you're trying to create. So where we've been coming in is facilitating those conversations, not being the subject matter expert necessarily in what they're trying to do, but more in to try to bring them together as a group, versus a phase gate or handoff process, which is what we've seen at a lot of agencies in the past. What they're buying doesn't matter, what services they're trying to drive. It's really is bringing everyone together, getting on the same page from the get-go, because once it's written into the contract, there is flexibility, but there are some hard deliverables oftentimes and outcomes that'll lead where the delivery team goes once they get on board.
Yeah, that's a great point. Agile contracts are not exclusive to agile delivery. You can be more agile in the procurement process for any type of requirement, and it's really all those things that Darren just said. But in addition, it's also about simplifying the upfront process. So historically, where we've attempted to detail every possible delivery in the exact way we want it delivered, how can we step back from the process, be very explicit about what we're trying to achieve under the endeavor, and then allowing industry to be creative, which is why we're hiring them in the first place. They're the experts. Allow them to use their creative capabilities and innovation to bring the best solutions.
I'm wondering if you can just walk us through sort of a scenario to help us understand more about Agile, contracts. So, traditionally in the government contracting world, we would say we have $100 million to go build this thing, right? We want to build this software program that allows people to put in applications for a federal job, right? We have $100 million to do it. Can you walk us through what that would look like, how we would sort of structure that contract from a traditional contract into more of an Agile type of contract?
Sure. I think the first question I would ask is, one, what are we trying to optimize for? Is it speed to contract, speed to delivery? Is it price? Is it innovation? What are we actually trying to get to? The second thing I would ask is, when are you expecting delivery for this $100 million capability? And my expectation, based on about 2 decades of experience, is probably no less than 5 years and probably closer to 10. And so from there, I would probably ask, if I were to go back 10 years and ask, what would you like your cell phone to look like, or how would you like it to perform, and then handed it to you today, how happy would you be? And that's where I'd probably start to frame the conversation, because where we want to go to next is, you probably don't know what you want for $100 million 5 years from now. You have an idea, you have a vision of where you want to get to, you have an objective that you want to achieve. And so that's where we would start. Typically, on the specific client that Darren was mentioning, where we start is we actually do a product vision session. So it's like a 7-minute training. Let's just make sure we all understand what a product vision is. It's not just the product owner, it's the integrated stakeholders. We get together, we do this quick training, and then we actually walk through building the product vision statement as a team. And what's so fascinating about that is, even though they will all generally show up thinking they know exactly what they want and are in agreement, we typically find out very quickly they all have a very different understanding of where they're trying to get to. And so that session, which is about 30 minutes in most cases, we really get to a solidified, agreed to vision, which is the most important place to start. And from there, we would work through from that vision to a similar session around a statement of objectives. And a statement of objectives differs from the statement of work. It's not a bunch of shall statements. It's not the exact end state we're driving to. It's literally the objectives. What are the outcomes we're working towards? And from there, it really ties in closely to Agile delivery. It's not what do we want 5 years from now. It's where do we want to start? What is the first minimum viable product we want to deliver, hopefully into our hands of users? Now, a lot of agencies have their own sort of way in which they can and can't deliver quickly. Those are some of the obstacles that we work very closely together to try and help the agency mature past, and things like security, how quickly they can roll capabilities out, and that's part of what we do with the agency. But sometimes you have to operate within the existing structure and meet your users where they are. So we will take that objective and formulate a statement of objectives. And then it really comes down to human-centered design. Let's talk to industry. Let's have really open dialogue in our market research, not just send out an RFI and get back a bunch of comments. We really want to engage deeply with industry. We want to engage deeply with end users and make sure that we understand what's most valuable and most important to them. From there, we would determine what acquisition strategy. So this goes back to the very first question. What is the prioritization? If you want a vendor on board delivering content in 3 months, we might leverage some of the capabilities within the small business program, like a direct award to an 8A. If you want to optimize for price or innovation, then we want more ideas. We want competition. That doesn't mean necessarily we're going to go do a FAR 15 huge acquisition completely wide open. We might choose to take advantage of various other sections of the FAR, such as ordering vehicles or GWACs, where we can identify vendors through our in-depth market research and have a much more meaningful conversation with them and design the requirements and release it to a smaller subset. In some cases, it does make sense to go wide open, and we'll do that as well. But it's all about what are the users' needs and how do we align with them.
Great. Darren, can you talk a little bit more about your experience with the difference between the statement of objectives and the statement of work?
Yeah, I think I think the long and short of it is you're trying not to predict the future. We've learned time and time again, both on the contractor side, but also partnering with our or partnering with our federal agencies is like, we just don't know. So in Jonathan's example, how much modernization is part of that $100 million project? Do you need a CI/CD? Do you need DevSecOps? Do you need the tools in place, or do you already have them? They just haven't been configured or used correctly or in such a way at an enterprise level. The statement of objectives have been great in trying to figure out what are your objectives, what are the outcomes you're driving towards, and gives, as Johnathan stated, is give your contractors, the people you're paying a lot of money for, the capability, or excuse me, the room to show off their capabilities, their innovation, their creativity to get you to that outcome. Because if you could have done it yourself, you probably would have. And most shops that we work with, or I shouldn't say most shop, but there's a lot of shops that don't have their own development staff, their own delivery staff. So you're even more dependent on the capabilities of your contractors to do so. So you focus on what you're good at, which is the vision, the business need, the outcome on the federal side, and then bring in the talent to execute on what I say is the what and the how to deliver against those objectives. In a statement of work, you're taking a lot of ownership on not only what is the vision, what are the outcomes, but then you're having to solution inside the contract and giving yourself no chance to change your mind, no chance for flexibility. And you're really sort of downgrading whoever you bring in from a contractual perspective, but a contractor perspective, because they're limited to those thou shalt statements. And I know there's ways to adjust that, but why even waste your time doing it up front when you can really drive from a statement of work, statement of objectives perspective, versus, tying people down through a statement of work or taking that burden on yourself when there's probably maybe smarter people that can figure this out for you. And I always say is waiting till the last responsible moment. Is sometimes you don't know what you need until it's closer to you, and then you can have a team that's capable to deliver against that need when you have more information, more data, and smarter decisions.
So I love what you're both are saying, and one thing that we haven't covered yet that I think we should is, what is the problem that we're trying to solve here? What is the problem that traditional acquisition process has that we're trying to solve with agile acquisitions? Can you speak on that a bit? Just want to go back to that and make sure we covered that.
The problems in the acquisition space is a target-rich environment. So we could do a whole series on that, what we're trying to solve. But if I were to try to summarize it in a short bit here, I would say we spend an exorbitant amount of time and resources attempting to bring in capabilities into the government. And typically, we don't have the answers ourselves. That's why we're outsourcing it. But the traditional process of acquisition starts from an assumption that we in fact do. And the result is a lot of resources for a capability that the GAO has reported consistently over the last decade is typically, and when I say typically, around 90% of the time, unsuccessful from a cost schedule and performance perspective. That's what we're trying to solve is if we can take those resources and realign them to deliver the things we actually do know, to focus on where are we trying to go, how do we get the best vendor in, and how do we enable the entire team, the vendor and the government team, to deliver in such a way that they can take advantage of new technologies as they arise, new requirements as they unfold. And while this isn't truly a contracting challenge, when I hear acquisition, I think big A and little a. Little a is contracting. Big A is the acquisition sphere. One of the main challenges we face is the product owner role is not a true government role like a job series in most agencies. And so we anoint people as a product owner. They might have been a project manager or program manager when they went to bed or a core. and the next day they're just magically a product owner, and that's a very specific skill set. And so this capability that we build out in the agile acquisition process only works as well as it's managed on the execution side. And so part of what we try to do in this agile acquisition phase is not just build the documents in the right way, but to ensure the team is cohesive and has the right people in place. And one of the things I really enjoy about working with Darren and his team at Pliant is that not only do we just give them, hey, here's your agile contract, go forth and execute, because I've seen over and over again where that's not successful, and it's not successful because they don't have the right person in place, and that's okay. Like, not every agency is going to have product owners on staff, and you just have to acknowledge that. And if you don't have it on staff, then how do you enable those people to actually play that role effectively? And the coaches that Darren has been able to bring along, it makes the effort worth it. It's what makes it, it's like the secret sauce. It's getting people to not just be able to do it, but to learn. So it's not just, help pay this contractor and they're going to tell you all the right answers. It's an education on the job where now once they learn, we can move to the next group and maybe have touch points, but we know that program is in good hands and good health.
What I love
Thank
that
you,
you're saying is that partnership, the partnership between the contractor and the agency, and it feels, a little bit different. It feels, a lot of times in the past, my experience has been, it's just been, go build this and here you go. And, and that's sort of the typical waterfall model that Agile is trying to move against. And I'm interested in if you could talk a little bit more about those partnerships and maybe, some experiences about how that partnership between industry and government has really improved the situation or really built up, a better product.
I can start with this one, Bryan. Is what the culture, the structure, and what we like to call the operating model needs to shift or is shifting, depending on what agency you're at in the federal government. And so, as Johnathan pointed out, is what we're trying to do is drive the federal partners and product owners to lead the vision of the product. And usually a product is a cluster of applications and technology that solves a business problem. So it could be beyond just one application. It could be one application. It could be many. Point being is it is providing a service or to the federal government based on a business need that they have. Having that person be accountable on the federal side for that vision, and then partnering with the contractor, that capability they've brought into the agency to drive the solutioning of the technology to meet the business need based on the vision of the product owner. So the great part about it is there's very clear roles. The accountability becomes even more on the federal side to lead the vision and understand the business need. It becomes even more clear on the contractor side on what the solutioning and sort of what we call technical excellence or product delivery excellence. But it takes both of them to come together on a consistent, regular, and constant basis to always make sure we're building the right thing, building it right, and then building it fast. And everyone contributes to all three of those factors in good product delivery.
Yeah, I could add maybe a different perspective to that answer. When I think of the partnership, I think it kind of starts with the team, the forming of the requirement, as we talked about previously, but also with industry. A lot of times when we talk about, agile adoption, and we talk about these non-traditional vendors getting new blood into the federal government, and in that is sort of like an implicit undertone of like traditional contractors are bad, and they're not bad. They're a reflection of the government that they've been supporting for 100 years. So they have built these large companies to do exactly what the government has asked them to do. And now we are changing. We are helping the government change their perspective on how to do this. And these are now very large ships, much like the government. It's hard to turn. And you're starting to see even the more traditional companies are trying to adopt these practices. It's going to take time. We've set them up with pricing structures that makes it hard for them to attract top talent because they're stuck under vehicles with specific rates. So I don't think there's sort of a intentional misalignment here. It's we're asking them to do something different. So in the near term, obviously, there's value in bringing new companies in and companies that in their DNA, this is what they do. And so a lot of times that's where we start. But we have to be mindful of how do we help the entire ecosystem change, because we can't do this without our traditional vendors. They are very much a part of this ecosystem. We need them to come along this journey with us. And so I think it's just this open engagement. Transparency is so incredibly important to this process. And what we've found, I think Darren would agree, is like when we take the time to actually sit with our vendors and explain where we're trying to go, how we want to get there, why this matters, what technology makes sense, not the specific solution, but the nature of the technology. It'll be cloud hosted. We're going to use a CI/CD pipeline. We're going to automate testing. When we're very explicit about what our needs are and why we're doing it, I think industry is more than happy to meet us where we are. And so I think this sort of partnership is all about conversations and transparency. And going back to a comment Darren made earlier, getting away from this approach of throwing things over the wall and say, bring me a rock, and hoping they come back with the right rock, because that rarely ever works.
How have we seen sort of those, those bigs in the contracting space? How have they been embracing this, or is there resistance, or how do we sort of move them into this new cycle? And what are some successes that you've had around that?
Yeah, certainly there was resistance in the beginning, all right? Like, we'll bide our time. This is another fad. It'll go away. That is definitely changing. I've had conversations with multiple large companies that are all in. How do we do this? We want to rebrand. We want to restructure. What can we do to change the perception of who we are? So they're getting there. There's a lot of acquisitions of smaller companies occurring. I think that's a good thing, right? They're trying to inject the DNA into their companies. So I think the trend is there. I think everybody acknowledges whether Agile is the final answer, innovation and iteration is the final answer. We are going that way, regardless of what you call it or what brand you stamp on it. So I do believe we're moving there. Like I said, it's going to take time. Everything in the government takes time, and we need to get the wins we can quickly. The value flywheel suggests, these small wins will enable the greater movement. And so that's what we're doing. But it's not a matter of like, cut these people out and just work with these type of companies. We've got to bring everybody along. And I've had a number of examples where I've worked with large businesses that they'll create separate entities within themselves that are purely dedicated to this type of development. And so I think that's part of the answer as well. It's a multifaceted approach.
That's great. So we talked about it, what's in it sort of on the government side, but what's in it for these contractors? Like what's in it to motivate them to want to change and move in this new model?
Yeah, I can hit on this real quick. I think the easy answer is their future. This is the new expectation. The people that we're working with now, the agencies we're working with now that are just adopting Agile or Agile practices, incremental cloud, like they're late adopters, period. And so if they have contractors supporting them, they're even later adopters. So things like workforce enablement isn't just a Fed word. It's like Johnathan shared, it's showing up on both sides of the street, both federal and contractor, of how do we up our game? How do we increase our capabilities and services in these areas, knowing that that is what good product delivery is, period. When you're looking at, I'd say products in general, but definitely from a software perspective, this is not the wave of the future. This is the wave of yesterday now, and this will evolve moving forward.
I think it's probably worth addressing sort of the culture and leadership components of this. So I think it's fairly obvious from like senior leaders, they say the right things. They want to do the right thing. They want to move their agencies forward to meet the mission in the most effective way possible. And we see on the front lines, the people who are using the technology, they just want better technology. I mean, they expect it. They see it in their everyday life, and then they show up to work and they're using outdated, inoperable system, practically inoperable systems to get their job done. And they know it doesn't need to be this painful. So it's how do we move sort of the middle section of an agency along this journey? And it's not because they're bad people or they want to hold an agency back. It's that sort of the middle layer of a bureaucracy, which is what large organizations are, not a bad term necessarily. The middle layer of the bureaucracy's job is it's to prevent like wild, crazy ideas jerking the organization left and right every day, because that's a waste of resources as well. So it's, how do we affect the larger culture of an agency? And the way in which we do that, one is sort of the value flywheel I mentioned, which is just demonstrating success at the smallest scale possible and building and growing off of that is one. Two is sharing experiences. Where has this been done elsewhere? You're not the first person over the ridge. How can you take lessons learned from other organizations? And the third is, what is in it for them? And what's in it for them is more efficiency, and more efficiency means more resources, which means they can accomplish greater good. And I believe most, if not all, civil servants joined their agencies because at the end of the day, they want to do good. They want to do right by the organization's mission. And so a culture change from the top down at all levels is what is the key ingredient to all of this. Who is able to take responsible risks, understanding deeply, the rules and regulations that you have to follow. How close to the outline can you get and make change without going over the edge? And it's a careful process that you have to do with experience and people who have gone through this before. I mentioned having the coaches, having people alongside you. A recent study came out that like most Fortune 500 organizations said coaching is the most important aspect of their organization, that they rely on it. And it's not because you have someone cheering you along. It's because you have someone who has taken the missteps before and can walk you around kind of the landmines and the tripwires and say, I know how this goes. Let me give you some advice on how you can implement this in your specific organization. What's the flavor that'll work for you?
Yeah, and to hit on that point, an example, Johnathan and I are working on a client now, and just the adoption of the new, or I shouldn't say new, it's been around for a little while, but 18F's QASP, and getting to the end state that the QASP demands would have been just way too much for the agency that we're working with and their contractors. And so building things like progression on how do you get there, and being okay with the fact that we're not going to get there in one step. It's going to be a 2 or 3 or 4 step process to get to that final destination, and drawing that out, showing the stepping stones. As Johnathan stated, like, leadership wants to be the champion, but they don't always know what the stepping stones are to get there and how to articulate that to their people so they can take action in sort of that brass tacks. And so finding the right partners, bringing people in who have done this before and say, this is how it worked here, this is how it worked there, this is how, based on your culture, your environment, your structure, how it could possibly work in your agency. And so bring those people in, be willing to take small measured risk, but also know that these risks are moving you towards the outcome in which you've agreed that is the endpoint.